So let's talk about the 2025 Ballon d'Or. Aitana Bonmatí claimed her third consecutive Ballon d'Or, joining an exclusive group with Lionel Messi and Michel Platini, and becoming the first female player to achieve this feat. However, her victory feels like a blatant injustice and a further sign that women's Ballon d'Or isn't fit for purpose. Let's dive into it. I want to start by prefacing I think that Aitana Bonmatí is an incredible player. She's probably the second greatest player to ever lace the boots behind Marta. So when I criticise her in this video, it's not that she's not a fantastic footballer, but this year I don't believe she won the Ballon d'Or. And I know I can see the Barcelona comments coming already, claiming I've got an agenda against Barcelona or Spain or Bonmati, but that's simply not the case. I just don't think she deserved the Ballon d'Or this year. And for the record, I do think the Copper Trophy was merited by going to Vicky Lopez. I think she deserved that honour. She had a fantastic season, and compared to the other candidates, she was far and away the best player there. But in terms of Ballon d'Or, I don't think that Bonmati deserved it. So let's start by going through the criteria for the Ballon d'Or. So the first point of criteria is based on individual performances, showing important and decisive character. So I want to start by looking at goal contributions. Obviously, looking at individual performances, that is the best metric by which to judge it. And as we look at goal contributions, we see Alessia Putellas comes top of the list for minutes per goal contribution. Of course, Payot, if we look at just total alone, phenomenal season. Of course, the majority of that coming in the Liga Ref. Now, there is going to be a quality difference there. The Liga Ref is a weaker league than the WSL. Feel free to dispute that in the comments, but that is a subjective opinion. I think that's the biggest problem with the Ballon d'Or, and throughout this discussion, it's subjective. It's based on how you believe a player performed, but you can try and apply metrics to take a look at the season. I think when you look at Bonmati's campaign, 15 goals, 11 assists, 26 total goal contributions, that's not a bad tally at all. But it was behind Eva Payot and Putellas in terms of raw numbers. It's behind both of them for minutes per goal contribution. So I think to say that she deserved the Ballon d'Or, even if you disregard teams from other players from other teams and other leagues, I don't think she deserved it within Barcelona or within Spain. And so I think then it's very difficult from that standpoint to argue for Aitana Bonmatí from that point. Heck, I even think that Patrick Gallardo was probably a more deserving victor, or someone like Claudia Pina. Pina had a fantastic campaign. So I don't think that Aitana Bonmatí was a standout player in either of those two sides, in which case I don't think the Ballon d'Or going to her is merited in any way whatsoever. Then looking at the other examples of Alessia, Russo and Mariona Caldentey, the most stringent examples of players who could have competed for the title. Now, of course, there were options like Leah Williamson as well, who we'll get to, but in terms of goal contributions, it's not really a metric we can judge Bonmatí against. So we'll start by looking at Russo and Caldentey as well. Russo last season, 20 goals, 4 assists. Mariona Caldentey, 17 goals and 7 assists. Both players notching up 24 total contributions. Now, that is lower than Aitana Bonmatí. I think you've got to consider the WSL is a much more difficult league. There's less games within that league. There's less teams who are of a weaker standard. You've got a lot of top sides than WSL. Whereas for Barcelona, there is no real challenge in there beyond Real Madrid, who obviously did beat them for the first time ever this season. So I look at that and I look at the fact that Bonmatí was fairly level with Russo and Caldentey, and say, well, then I think Russo and Caldentey both had better output, both had better seasons in terms of output. So again, I think to say that Bonmatí was a standout in that regard, I just disagree. Then as we move on to individual performances and those decisive moments, well, did Bonmatí have them this season? Because she lost 2 major competition finals. And I know people have made the argument that even getting to those finals is a fantastic achievement, but we're talking about the creme de la creme. We're talking about the best player in the world. Was she that this season when they lost the Women's Champions League final and lost the Euros final? 2 games which she was on the pitch for? Absolutely not. She didn't have moments in those games. In the Euros final, she missed her penalty. I think she struggled to impact the game in normal time. And even if you take a look at someone like Mariona Caldentey, who was of course in that game and also missed a penalty, also lost that final, she won the Women's Champions League and she scored in that Euros final. So I think it's really difficult to argue based on the merit of individual performances that she was better than someone like Caldentey. And then as for someone like Alessia Russo, well, Russo won both the Euros and the UWCL this season. She scored in the Euros final. She had decisive goals in the UWCL knockouts as well. So I think you can easily argue there that there's a completely different thing there. That Bonmati just cannot compete with those players in terms of individual performances this season. And that disregards even moving on towards team performances and achievements, because these players stood out in those finals. Williamson's another one, was phenomenal in the Euros final and the Women's Champions League final. And again, I would argue that she merited the award over Aitana Bonmatí. So on to point 2 of the criteria. This is about team performances and achievements. I think this is the area where Bonmati has the least of a leg to stand on. She was part of a Barcelona side who weren't as successful as they usually are. She was part of a Spain side who weren't as successful as they usually are. So I think it's the area where the argument for Bonmati falls down most considerably. And again, there's a subjective element, because you've got to consider which of these competitions and achievements which you place the most value on. But in my opinion, the Liga F is weaker than the WSL. But even if you consider it as a comparable competition, then you could realistically make metrics in order to judge this. But I think looking at a domestic treble for Barcelona in a league which is much weaker than the WSL, that already would put any Barcelona player in my mind behind Chelsea. Now the problem for Chelsea, of course, is they didn't really have any standout players. So the number of injuries they had, the amount of rotation, there wasn't really a standout. Now obviously Hannah Hampton, I think, would have merited this 100%, but we're never going to see the Ballon d'Or given to a goalkeeper. The point of the Ballon d'Or is to award the most incredible attacker. That always has been the case. Now, I think it's another conversation for another day, whether we should be giving it to more goalkeepers and defenders. I think it's naturally quite difficult to assess whether those players, or how you can compare those players. And it's part of the problem with trying to hand out individual awards. It's very difficult to compare players who play in completely different environments for completely different teams in completely different positions. So it's very difficult, and obviously these awards are fairly meaningless at the end of the day. The important trophies in football are the team ones. It's a team sport for a reason, but when you're trying to split hairs as to who is the best player in the world, you've got to look at those team achievements. And Barcelona domestic treble for me would rank any Barcelona player, even if you consider the two leagues as comparable, at the same level as any Chelsea player. Then when you consider that Spain lost the European final and England won it, naturally anyone who played for Chelsea and England has to be considered ahead of someone who played for Barcelona and Spain. And again, this is only in the section when you're looking at team performances and achievements, but this is going to have a huge impact on who goes on to win the awards. Then the other thing you've got to consider is Arsenal European champions. And as much as I don't have a massive love for Arsenal, you can probably look at the pictures on the walls and see that. You have to give them merit where it's due. They were European champions this season. And so the same then applies for England and Arsenal. If someone played for England and Arsenal, where there are a lot of those, they've got to be considered in a very high esteem for this award. So I think Barcelona's domestic treble, especially when it represents a year where Barcelona were worse than they normally are. It's the first year for the last two that they've not been unbeaten in the league. It's the first one in the last two they've not won the Champions League. Spain didn't win anything when 2 years ago they did. They won the World Cup. So I think everything in this season for Bonmatí was worse than it should be. So again, it's another criteria where I don't think that she would be at the same level as someone like a Caldentey, and especially not at the same level as someone like an Alessia Russo or Leah Williamson. So then moving on to the third point of criteria. Now this one's a little bit vague, but it's called class and fair play. So this is going to relate to how players carry themselves off the pitch, but also how they conduct themselves on the field of play. Now, in terms of on-pitch stuff, it's fairly explanatory. We can take a look at any examples of cautions or fouls or cards, and we can look at whether those players deserve it because of that. Now, Aitana Bonmatí had 2 yellow cards in the 2 competitions that I consider most important, the League and the UWSL last season. That is the same number as Alessia and the same number as Mariona Caldentey. But Alessia Russo didn't pick up a single yellow card, and Eva Payot only picked up 1 yellow card. So when you consider that, and by the way, none of these players picked up any red cards, so they're all very much in a similar ballpark. But when you consider that, Bonmatí has to be at least a point in your consideration behind someone like an Alessia Russo or Eva Payot. And I also think when you're talking about class and fair play, all you've got to do is read Aitana Bonmatí's statements after games in press conferences and see that there isn't often very much class there. If we take a press conference after the Euros defeat, she said, yeah, today it hurts a lot because we were convinced that we were doing a great tournament and we are here with the mentality to come today and win. But in football, who plays better doesn't always win. I think we were better today on the pitch, but you have to score one more goal than your opponent to win the match, and we didn't do it. So we go to the penalties and we lose it. It was very cruel given how the tournament went and how the match went, but sometimes in football it's not the best team that wins, nor the team that deserves to win on the pitch. No, I think this is a statement which lacks grace, and it's something we've seen throughout Bonmati's season, really, where they lost the Champions League final and she didn't seem to respect the fact that Arsenal played very well on that day. And then the same we saw for the European Championship final, as in that message that I just read out. So I think to say that she was deserving of it in that segment is also untrue. That statement lacks class. Her conduct on the field can lack class at times. It's what makes her such a great competitor. She wants to win above everything else. But then that does have to mark her down to some extent in that final criteria. So looking through all three of those criteria, where did Aitana Bonmatí deserve the Ballon d'Or? I just don't see it. Personally, I think in terms of the best for narrative, and I know they love going for Barcelona players, but surely Mariona Caldentey deserved it. She moved from from Barcelona, where you're in a settled environment, where you're expected to win everything every year, and she did the Neymar. She had to get out of the shadow of Alessia and out of the shadow of Aitana Bonmatí. Similar to when Neymar left Barcelona in 2017 to move to PSG. He was never going to win the Ballon d'Or alongside Messi and Suarez. And the same is true for Mariona Caldentey. She was never going to win the Ballon d'Or at Barcelona. So she moved to Arsenal. She took a punt. Arsenal weren't the best team in the world. She was moving from the best team in the world to Arsenal, with the dream of then going on to be able to be the best player in that side and drag them to a Champions League title. And that is absolutely what she did. Now, Arsenal are no slouches. They're a very strong side, but they are not the level of FC Barcelona, a side who've won countless Champions Leagues in the last half a decade, to Arsenal, who haven't won one since 2000, since in the 2000s. So I think when you consider that narrative, when you consider what Caldentey did, where she went down to Arsenal, she went and won a Champions League title, that's got to be worthy of a Ballon d'Or. I also think there's a very good claim for Alessia Russo. I think slightly less than Mariona Caldentey, because while she won more on the pitch, I would say that Caldentey was more important to both Spain's run to the final and to Arsenal's victory in the Champions League. But there is a very good case for Alessia Russo. I think either of those would have been deserved winners. Russo was the top goal scorer in the Euros. She was top goal scorer in the WSL as well. She was second top goal scorer, only behind Claudia Pina in the Women's Champions League. So unless she moves to the Liga F and scores 30 goals a season, I don't see how she could have done any better in this campaign. So personally, I think that it had to go to one of those two players. Williamson, obviously, of course, would have been a great option, but realistically, as I say, we're not going to see defenders and goalkeepers winning the Ballon d'Or. So I hope that nicely summarises my thoughts on the Ballon d'Or and why, in my opinion, Aitana Bonmatí didn't deserve the title, but instead it should have gone to Mariona Caldentey. Now, I know the comment section will be rife with discussion, but do keep it civil. But I want to hear from you. Do you think that Aitana Bonmatí genuinely deserved the award? Let us know, give me a reasoning, and I'll happily reply to it. But I think a lot of the discussion that I've seen across social media has been charged with pure passion, but actually, when you take an objective lens, I have no horse in this race. I don't like Arsenal, I don't like Barcelona, but from a purely objective footballing standpoint, Arsenal's Caldentey, Russo, Williamson all had a better season than Aitana Bonmatí. So for that reason, they deserve to win the Ballon d'Or. The Ballon d'Or is about who had the best individual year, not about who is the best player at any given time. Aitana Bonmatí is a fantastic footballer, but she didn't have a better season or a better year than any of the three players that could have won it for Arsenal. So yeah, I don't think this is. I don't think there's much that could sway my opinion. But do get involved in the comments. Let me know your thoughts, and of course, if you agree with me, even better, get involved in the comments and let me know that as well. But that is everything from me today. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.